respected Dean and Principal of SC Medical College, Cuttack, dear colleagues, esteemed speakers, and participants of today's webinar. I welcome you all for joining us today. At the outset, I must congratulate Professor Dr. Datteshwar Hota, our Dean and Principal, for his noble endeavor of starting this type of academic sessions in view of Platinum Jubilee celebration of SCB Medical College and Hospital, Cuttack. Today is the turn of endocrine surgery, our department, which is newly evolved super speciality, and there are few dedicated teaching institutions in our country to produce the large number of super specialized doctors in this discipline. And as all of you know, we know, endocrine surgical cases in our day-to-day practice are less in comparison to other disciplines. And more often than not, these cases are misdiagnosed and the patients moves from department to department with futile results. Keeping this in mind, we have selected a topic on parathyroid, especially the primary hyperparathyroidism, which often moves the patients of such disease, moves from department to department and being harassed finally. And such type of patients are not uncommon in our country. And we have chosen that topic for this type of gathering, which will be suitable to all of us. And this subject will be highlighted. Our respected speaker, Dr. Rajeev Parameswaran, who is the head of the endocrine surgical unit at National University of Health System, Singapore. In addition to that, we have another speaker in this session. He is none other than Professor Dr. S.K. Misra, is the Professor of Endocrine Surgery. Recently, he has retired on 30th June from SCPGIMS Lucknow, and he is well known to us, and he is instrumental in developing our department of endocrine surgery since last, let us say, last 20 years. So I welcome him, and he will speak on the scientific and technical advancement to drive endocrine surgery for the future. And few introductions regarding the speaker, because they are not well known to others. So first speaker, Dr. Rajeev Parameswaran, who is the head of the endocrine surgical unit of National University of Health System, Singapore, and who is having a very good qualification academic degree. He is graduated in 1994, trained in surgery in UK, higher training he obtained in endocrine surgery at Oxford. He has got very good academic achievements, worked in endocrine surgery department in UK as consultant, and since 2014, he has been working in National University of Health System, Singapore, and he is at present the head of the endocrine surgery there, and also the program director of endocrine surgery fellowship program at Singapore. He has a number of publications, and he has published at least 64 research publications in peer-reviewed journals. He is very much interested in the field of research, and the area of interest is endocrine cancers. Contributed many chapters in different textbooks, especially very prestigious textbook like Scott Brown's Otolaryngology and Head and Neck Surgery, evidence-based endocrine surgery, which I have come across. I have read many chapters, and also he has contributed quite good number of chapters in the Asian textbook of endocrinology published by J.P. Brothers, New Delhi. Also, he has invited to deliver important lectures at national and international level. Now, I request Dr. Rajiv Parameswaran to deliver his speech regarding his topic is primary hyperparathyroidism then and now. Dr. Parameswaran.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation. And it's indeed a great pleasure and honor to be talking at this meeting. First of all, I would like to thank SCB Medical College for its 75th Platinum Jubilee celebrations. And please allow me to share the screen, please.
You are allowed, sir.
Okay, can you give me 1 minute? Sorry, this is where. Okay, I'm having a problem. Can I log in with my Mac and I'll be back? Just give me 1 minute, all right?
Yes. Hello, Dr. Rajiv. Hello, Rajiv, you can listen to.
Okay, sorry about that. There was a small technical glitch. Can I share my screen? Can you help me share my screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the small technical glitch. So I'm going to be talking about primary hyperparathyroidism then and now. So I don't think we can talk about parathyroid surgery without paying our homages to the great parathyroid surgery. And these are the people who contributed a significant lot to the understanding of a parathyroid disease. Here we have Richard Owen, who was the first to describe the parathyroid gland in the great Indian rhinoceros. This was on a prosection of the specimen in London Zoo in 1849. And the second person you see here is the third-year medical student, Ives Sandstrom, who did a lot of work on parathyroid glands, especially in animals, and called them glandulae parathyroideae. We should not forget our patients, especially these patients who contributed significantly to understanding of parathyroid disease. This is Charles Martel, a seaman who was 6 feet tall, but over a period of 3-4 years, he lost his stature because of bony disease involvement and was significantly affected by the disease to an extent where he had about 5 operations on his neck, but still could not be cured until he took it upon himself to go and tell Oliver Cope that the parathyroid was more likely to be in the mediastinum, and that was where the parathyroid tumor was found. Unfortunately, he died after his surgery from laryngospasm. We should not forget Elwood Dawkins. Elwood Dawkins was a patient who sustained severe parathyroid disease who basically ended up having osteitis fibrosa cystica, and following a parathyroid tumor, actually had severe complications, especially with hypocalcemia, from today what we know as the hungry bone syndrome. We should not forget Rosalind Yalow, who was instrumental in developing the immunoassays, especially the first generation PTH assay, for which she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine in the year 1977. So all these contributions help understand parathyroid disease much better, and has advanced the field so much that we are grateful to these people for their contributions. Right. Parathyroid disease is very common. It is the third most common endocrine disorder, and it's a very frequent cause of hypercalcemia. And hyperparathyroidism is diagnosed by a raised serum calcium and inappropriately elevated parathyroid hormone with a normal or raised urinary calcium excretion. Now, the treatment for this condition is surgery, except for patients who have significant comorbidity where you cannot perform surgery, or patient may choose not to have it. But the mainstay of treatment is parathyroidectomy. Now, what are the causes of primary hyperparathyroidism? Well, 90 to 94% are from a single gland disease, what we call as an adenoma. About 9% of patients may have four gland disease, what we call as hyperplasia, and about 1% of patients may have cancers. Now, if you look at the evolution of parathyroid surgery, what has happened is that if you look at the nature of the disease, in the past, predominantly, patients were symptomatic, whereas today, we are now seeing patients who are mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic. Now, what has also advanced is the imaging modalities, where we used to do ultrasound sestami B. Today, we are with choline PET. And what in the past, we used to do open parathyroidectomy. Then came the era of minimally invasive parathyroid surgery, and now we are in the era of transoral parathyroidectomy. So how was parathyroid disease then? Then it means in the past. In this last century, patients predominantly presented with stones, bones, moans, groans, and cyclic overtones. And this is something you will see in every surgical textbook you read. Now, most of these patients had significant end organ damages like osteoporosis, renal nephrocalcinosis, osteitis fibrosa cystica, and patients with chondrocalcinosis and pseudogout. And pancreatitis is also an uncommon presentation in these patients. Now, if you look at the epidemiology of the disease over the last 5-6 decades, you will see there were two peaks during this period of where parathyroid disease was treated. Predominantly seen in women, more than men, and these two peaks can be attributed to, one is the biochemical screening, which came in the 1970s, the automated analyzers. Now you go into a lab, you put your blood into a machine, it brings out all the results, including your calcium, and if you find a high calcium, you would work up for parathyroid disease. Now in the 90s, it was osteoporosis screening that helped detect more of these patients, and the incidence, this was where the second rise in incidence was seen. Now, I look back into history and see if anyone actually looked at the past and present of parathyroid disease. And this was one publication by Selwyn Taylor, who published the series of his cohort of parathyroid patients that underwent surgery. And you can see here, there's a wide spectrum of a range of the ages where parathyroid disease were involved, including children. Now, at that time, there was no ultrasound scan or sestami B, so most of the patients had venous sampling to identify the site of the tumor, and that dictated, which parathyroid glands they were going to be removing. And in that cohort, predominantly the disease was adenoma, but about a quarter of the patients had hyperplasia, and about 3 patients had carcinomas. The subsequent publication in the 80s, again showing the phase of parathyroid surgery, how it changed. You can already start seeing with incidental disease and non-specific symptoms began to be diagnosed and be offered treatment. And majority of this treatment was again single gland disease, but a lot of patients had subtotal and total parathyroidectomy. Now, if you look at the outcomes from the past, when these patients had surgery, actually it is not very bad. 93%, significant proportion of hypertension, a fantastic result. But do look at the problems they had. There was some degree of mortality and also morbidity from significant hypocalcemia, probably because of hungry bone syndrome. Now, what is the face of parathyroid disease now? Today, we are seeing more of asymptomatic parathyroid patients. We have improved imaging, and we have seen advances in surgery. Now, this was a publication just came out from PGI Chandigarh in the Journal of Bone Mineral Metabolism. And this is from an Indian cohort where you're beginning to see asymptomatic disease as well, because it was generally believed in India, we would generally see patients who are symptomatic, but they have reported a significant increase in asymptomatic disease as well. But in this modern era, we do see patients with problems. So this is one of my patients who presented with a brown tumor and a pathological fracture of a forearm with multiple brown tumors in her skeletal system. She also had a pancreatic phlegmon from a severe pancreatitis. And this was the ultrasound scan showing a large 3-centimeter adenoma, consistent with hyperintensity on the SESTEM-EB scan, and seen on the CT scan as well, as we clinically suspected this to be a parathyroid cancer. Now, one of the newer entities in the game in primary hyperparathyroidism is this entity called normal calcemic primary hyperparathyroidism. This is where you see increased PTH, but with a normal calcium in the context where your vitamin D levels are normal and the patients don't have associated renal disease. Now, if you look at the prevalence of this entity, you do see that it's anywhere between 1 to 17%. And most of these cohorts are reported from areas where there is predominant biochemical screening, especially in the United States and Europe. Now, there's a lot of controversy about this as to whether this is a subclinical disease. If left untreated, would it progress to clinical disease? Well, time will tell whether that is so the case, or is this a completely new or a different type of disease? What has also transpired over the last few decades is a better understanding of the molecular pathogenesis, how parathyroid tumors form, especially parathyroid cancers, the various oncogenes and the various cellular mechanisms which leads to these tumor formations. But today, we also have a better understanding of the various syndromes that are associated with parathyroid disease. And all this knowledge that we have acquired has now helped understand patients, how they present, and how we're going to offer them the necessary surgical intervention. And today, for these inherited conditions, we are moving to a precision-based surgery, which is based on the genomes that are expressed in these particular conditions. Right, what about imaging? So the classical imaging modalities was an ultrasound scan. So here you can see a hypoechoic lesion at the inferior pole of the thyroid. And clearly this is an abnormal lesion consistent with a parathyroid disease. And on this is a SESTEM-EB scan showing the uptake in the left inferior pole. Now, these used to be the two classic investigations we did for all our patients with parathyroid disease. Now, there are times when the imaging investigations are discordant, meaning one is positive and the other is negative. Then we would do a 4D CT, 4-dimensional CT scan, is where you use a contrast with time, and this will tell you whether where the parathyroid is and whether it's a parathyroid and can differentiate it from a lymph nodal disease. The problem with the 4D CT scan is the amount of radiation that is involved with it. The new block, the kid on the block, is the choline PET CT scan. This is something that has come into vogue recently. And this is a beautiful technique because it, as seen as this recent series that was published, this was a meta-analysis published in the JAMA, which shows that choline PETs has a significant more high or sensitivity, both for patients and both for lesions. That means, it doesn't matter what the disease is, doesn't matter what the size of the lesion is, choline PET is much more effective than other modalities of investigations. So the current algorithm in most places where you have access to choline PET is to do it rather than doing an ultrasound and an EP scan. But this is not available in all places. So, but when it becomes available, it will be the gold standard investigation, I think. Right, what about surgery? Now, today in our armamentarium, we have a lot of tools and gizmos, something like, we have the intraoperative neuromonitoring, which can track your, recurrent laryngeal nerve, which will tell you about the functional integrity of the nerve at the end of the operation. I'm not going to be talking about that, but we have moved toward the era of minimal access and also the intraoperative parathyroid hormones. So if you look at the types of parathyroid surgery that is available, we have the open parathyroidectomy. We offer it to patients who have a scan negative disease. So then we do an open exploration and look at both sides and identify the parathyroid disease. But where the localization scans are positive, you offer a minimally invasive surgery, which can be open under general anesthesia, or even you can do it under local anesthesia and sedation, and the patients can go home the same day. Minimal access is where you're using an endoscopic or robotic technique, but these have to be done under general anesthesia. Open parathyroidectomy is the gold standard. And here is where you make an incision in front of the neck, you raise the platysmal flaps, you separate the straps, you mobilize the thyroid gland medially, and here you can see this large parathyroid gland. You find the pedicle, you clip it, and lo comes out this gland, and the patient is cured. It's a very simple operation, and it hardly takes 10-15 minutes to do it if they are well localized. Right, now you can do this with a medial approach or a lateral approach. Now I won't go into the very specifics of the surgery. Now this is one case where we do an open, minimally invasive parathyroid surgery. This is the sternocleidomastoid. This is a lateral approach. We divide the platysma, then we separate the muscles, and you medialize the thyroid gland, and there you find this tan brown tumor seen very nicely, which is your parathyroid. You ligate the pedicle, you take it out. Again, it's a very small, simple procedure. Right, the minimal access is where you use either a robot or an endoscope or other instruments to do the parathyroid surgery, and you can use it with gas or without gas. And here, what you essentially do is make an incision, you put your camera in, so you have a much more detailed look at the key organs. Here, the thyroid is pushed medially, and you can see you push your rest of the other two instruments in, which will help you with your surgery. Here you can see the parathyroid gland, which is shining there, and you mobilize it. You see the large parathyroid adenoma, and you clip it and you remove it. Now, the problems with minimal access is that they do have a higher conversion rate, which is about 8 to 10%, not forgetting the other little morbidities that are associated with it as well. Endoscopic parathyroidectomy is where you use very fine instruments. You can see here compared to the scale, these are very tiny instruments. Again, you come from the lateral side, you make a small cut at the level of the sternocleidomastoid. You create the space and you put your trocar in, and then you put your two other ports in, and you do your operation under general anesthesia. This is your muscles which you retract upwards, your thyroid gland, and you go looking for your parathyroids. Here you see the parathyroid gland very nicely demonstrated, and the recurrent laryngeal nerve. You identify the pedicle, the blood vessel, you ligate it, and then you take it out. Now, during all these procedures, it's very important that you take it out properly, otherwise you fracture it, the patients can have problems with parathyroidomatosis. So the problems with all these is your conversion rate, which is about 11%. The newer kid is the transoral endoscopic parathyroidectomy, the truly scarless thyroid surgery. This is done through the mouth, but the problem is the learning curve is quite long, and there are only a very few series that have been published on transoral parathyroidectomy. Right, how do you know your patient is cured? Well, you do an IOPTH, which is where you measure the PTH levels intraoperatively. If there's a 50% drop, more than 50% drop, you know your patient cured, and you use a Miami criteria, which has a high sensitivity and specificity. Small brief note about parathyroid cancer. This continues to be a challenge for us even now. Though the incidence of this is very low, there is some evidence that the incidence is increasing. But when you compare patients with primary hyperparathyroidism, patients are more symptomatic. They have a palpable mass and are very symptomatic with the disease. Now, diagnosing as a problem, so use the rule of threes. If your patient has a calcium of more than 3 and adenoma size of more than 3, you should suspect a parathyroid cancer and treat it accordingly. This is one of my patients with parathyroid cancer. You can see how infiltrative it is. You do a lobectomy and get a good clearance of this. If you don't do a good job, patient will come back with a recurrence. Now, parathyroid cancer is also a challenge for the pathologist. It's still very difficult sometimes to tell whether it's an adenoma or a malignancy. So you have an index of suspicion, and intraoperative decisions will help you how better to manage these patients. A brief note about hungry bone syndrome. This is where patients have profound hypocalcemia associated with hypophosphatemia and low magnesium, usually seen about 4 days post surgery. And patients are usually very symptomatic with it. You know, they have symptoms like here in this patient, where you can see the Trousseau sign and the Schwastek sign, which reflects the degree of hypocalcemia in these patients. Right, thankfully, the incidence of hungry bone syndrome is not very common, at least in our parts of the world. Most of the series that have reported on this is from India. I mean, Prof. Mishra is here, I'm sure he knows his publication published in 2002, I think. The incidence quoted as high as 90%. And this just reflects the nature of the disease that is seen in this part of the world, where you see a significant bony involvement in these patients. But with asymptomatic disease more being detected, I'm sure the incidence will fall with time. So in summary, if you look at then and now, today we are seeing patients who have more asymptomatic disease. The profile of the disease is almost similar with, you know, predominantly adenoma and hyperplasia and cancers. The hungry bone syndrome is not as common as it used to be. Now, if you look at the cure rates, I mean, as I showed in my earlier slide, where it was about 92%, today it's as close to 98, 99% in expert hands. And the mortality from this is almost zero. Morbidity is very low. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, parathyroid disease has evolved or is evolving from symptomatic to asymptomatic disease, especially in developing and developed world. And the molecular pathogenesis and understanding of the inherited conditions has helped understand better manage this patient. Advances in imaging and surgery has made outcomes of surgery much more favorable for patients. Parathyroid cancer is still a challenge in this modern era, but morbidity and mortality has reduced significantly. Thank you.
Excellent. And thank you very much, Rajiv, for excellent presentation, and it is quite picturative. And other questions, if any, will be discussed later after completion of second presentation. Then I will invite Professor Dr. S.K. Mishra for his presentation. As you know, Dr. S.K. Mishra is at present is working as the Emeritus Scientist of Indian Council of Medical Research in the campus of SGPGIMS Lucknow, and he was former professor of endocrine surgery and dean of SGPGIMS Lucknow. About 2 months back, he is superannuated. He had a very bright academic career and excellent academic achievements. He is the son of the soil, studied MBBS at MKCG Medical College, completed housemanship from SC Medical College, Cuttack in 1978, we regard him as our alumnus. He's MS in general surgery from a prestigious institute, PGI Chandigarh in 84. He started the Department of Endocrine Surgery at SCPGI MS Lucknow in the year 1989. He had undergone several training, including a higher training in endocrine surgery from the Nagoya University, Japan. He is the first professor who started PTCC course in endocrine surgery at SCPGI Lucknow in 97, and MCI approved MCS degree course in endocrine surgery, first time in the country in the same institution in 2004. Here, he has 3 decades or more than 3 decades of experience in teaching and research activities, produced 14 PDCC and 35 MCS candidates, which are serving all over the country and abroad. To see his publication is quite wonderful. He published not less than 240 articles, scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals, having national and international repute, contributed 20 chapters in different textbooks. Presentation received 43 scientific presentations at international level and 120 scientific presentations at national conferences. Invited lectures are so many, more than 200 invited lectures. And another very important thing, he has got tremendous interest, let us say passion, in the field of telemedicine and allied digital technology. He is the global consultant in telemedicine to different developing countries of the globe. You will be astonished to know that he has established the National School of Telemedicine and Biomedical Informatics at Lucknow in the campus of SCPGI MS Lucknow. And he is instrumental for developing and let us say shaping the telemedicine network in our state. He is such an eminent personality, and I invite again Professor Dr. S.K. Mishra to deliver his talk. He will be talking all the scientific and technical advancements to drive endocrine surgery for the future. Dr. Mishra, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. You can see my slides also. Can you see my slides?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So friends, respected Dean, Dr. Hota, faculty colleagues of the SCB Medical College, alumni colleagues of the SCB, some of my classmates who I can see there in the video conferencing already. Good afternoon and warm greetings from my institute, Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate in Medical Sciences. Professor Rajiv Parameswaran, my co-speakers in this session, were joined from anyways Singapore. It's a great pleasure for me to be part of this Platinum Jubilee celebration of SCB Medical College, where I spent nearly a year between 78 and 79 for my internship. It was a memorable experience, but I can never forget. Well, I have chosen the title for this pre-Platinum Jubilee CME, keeping in mind the colleagues who are participating are from diverse backgrounds. So you will not find anything talking very focused to endocrine surgery. You'll find there is something also related to your own specialty also. My 40 years experience in the endocrine surgery since I joined the residency program in PGI Chandigarh, and I finished in June 30th. I've seen this specialty is completely revolutionized. So I'll be little sharing of that and also predict something in the future what is going to happen. And the observation that I heard in these years pertains to so much scientific developments and also technological advancement. That's why I chose this title of my lecture, Scientific and Technical Advancement to drive the endocrine surgery of the future. I have not focused to any particular endocrine surgery organ or the systems. Now coming to the endocrine surgery subspecialty. As you know that endocrine surgery is a very young subspecialty. It's only 40 years old, less than 40 years old. Sometime around 1976, a group of like-minded surgeons from North America, they gathered and they decided to develop a society or a group to interest focus on endocrine surgery. Thus, the American Association of Endocrine Surgeons was formed. And very soon, they also were instrumental to get people from other parts of the world to make International Association of Endocrine Surgeons. So the story is only 4 decades old. Now, what they did, they developed as gatherings, as groups across different countries and focused their surgical area to thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, and pancreas, these 4 endocrine glands, that too, the islet cell portion of the pancreas. Now, it also simultaneously collaborated with endocrinologists. This is a specialty where without endocrinologists, we cannot survive. So the ATA, that is the American Thyroid Association, and the Endocrine Society of America, they also joined hand and they established and nurtured by the AIS and helped to crystallize the concept of surgeons' expertise in management of the surgery of endocrine glands. So if you find in this picture, general surgery in the different avatar, you'll find so many subspecialties of general surgery, and we land in the bottom, that is breast and endocrine, and we'll find institutions having both breast endocrine departments or separate breast and endocrine. Next. Now, most of the change that you find in the management of the endocrine diseases, surgical diseases, are based on molecular biology research outcomes. So you might have heard many of these guidelines, ATA guidelines, AES guidelines, several societies of endocrine surgeons, endocrine physicians, they have groups to recommend guidelines for management of endocrine surgical diseases. All of those things are based on the findings of the basic research. That is the importance of integrating basic research in a clinical specialty. And it is very much important in endocrine surgery specialty. The early success in the mapping of cloning genes responsible for heritable cancer syndromes to sequence the human genomes to adoption of next generation of sequencing techniques. So many of these tumors that we see, multiple endocrine neoplasia, you have many such MEN 1, 2, you have hereditary tumors of other kinds, and the tumor genesis from non-hereditary or endocrine tumors are all based on the genetic abnormality. So a broad understanding of the genes responsible for familiar and sporadic endocrine cancers now exist. Genetic testing of high-risk family members, even prophylactic surgery for some carriers of mutant genes are also in practice now. You might have heard about familial middle endocrine tumors, where there's a carrier of gene in the child, then they also remove the normal thyroid gland before even the tumor, before even the hyperplasia sets into the C cells of the thyroid. So the genetic testing of high-risk family members and even prophylactic surgery is now the call of the day. Of course, they're all based on the evidence, and genetic testing has to show that there is abnormality in the gene. And parallel efforts to determine the function of these altered genes have defined cell signaling pathways susceptible to treatment. You might have heard about the targeted therapy, etc. They're all based on these facts. Now, how high throughput gene expression methodologies now give insight into the entire network of cellular processes perturbed in endocrine malignancy. Endocrine malignancy, one of the very difficult malignancy, though many are treatable, many have good prognosis, but there are subsections like adrenal cancers, advanced thyroid cancers, anaplastic thyroid cancers, doesn't have a good reputation of giving good outcome. The knowledge gained has led to development of small molecule kinase inhibitor and other therapies able to specifically target the genes, pathways, and cell responsible for the disease. You might have heard so many kinase inhibitors are in the market. Many are experimental, many are also in therapy in practice. New treatments based on rational drug development and targeted therapies continue to be the focus of aggressive investigation and ongoing clinical trials. Diagnosis and prognostication in endocrine cancers has likewise been improved using the results of mutation and gene expression data. These are the advancements that has led us to understand these complex endocrine cancers. These discoveries are being translated into real-world tests and therapies that will impact the practice of endocrine surgery today and in the future. Familiarity with these breakthroughs and with ongoing challenges in the endocrine surgery, will enhance clinicians' abilities to apply the latest scientific developments to the optimal care of their patients. However, we need to understand, we need to have that category of the surgical experts who should have this background of the knowledge, who should have the background of the evolution of these tumors and what is the role of these genetic influences on these things. And thinking in that line and targeting customized treatment for their patients. So we need to have the next generation of the scientific surgeons. Now, what are the attributes of those surgeons? They should maintain a solid academic education. That means just mere general surgery is not enough. They have to specialize. They have to subspecialize. There are people who do only thyroid surgery. There are people who do only breast surgery. So that should be the approach to become expert in that field. And to seek the truth in the medicine and surgery, we need to devote a lot of time and do a lot of studies. Basing themselves in the scientific methods, any surgery, any diagnostic approach you choose has to be based on some evidence. Developing clinical and basic research for application in surgery and generating proof. Generating schools for surgical knowledge and research. Being innovative and creating patents, studying for their whole life. As you know that almost all doctors gathered in this congregation, you must be all reading even if you are retired. Governing themselves by ethical and moral values. This is very, very important and the call of the day. Ethics, especially when there is corporate medicine and when there is a lot of kind of pressure from the monetized world to lose your moral value. And ultimately, the sufferer is the patient and the families. Being committed to patients, society, and themselves. And you have to have a leader to steer this mission. Now, you have to see the transition, how it is happening. How this endocrine surgery specialty, like many other subspecialty of surgery, they have a very established path of transition. You have to have a different kind of approach now, different kind of learning exercise, different kind of ecosystem to devote yourself, your students, to go into this planning of specialty courses. It has to be student-centered teaching, skill-based study plans, problem-based learning, evidence-based medicine, basic clinical integration, medical computing, of course, this is very, very important nowadays, and remote medicine. So all these things are instruments, has to be all mastered by this next generation of scientific surgeons. Now, when you talk of the surgical successes or the real surgical technique and scientific advances, that has laid a good foundation for the next generation of surgery. Not only endocrine surgery, any talk of any surgery, whether GI surgery, cancer surgery, everywhere there is advancement. All those things are based on the strong foundation of basic understanding of the disease, scientific research, and of course, the surgical technique. Just getting a surgical technique or surgical equipment doesn't make a surgeon competent. One has to have the background basics of understanding the disease. A surgeon is still fighting to become a science. We know all of the surgical groups present here. We know how we originate from barbaric surgeons, the barbers. Now we have to establish ourselves as a scientist. We should have a sound foundation of anatomy, physiology, pathology, while advancing in genomics to understand the molecular basis of complex diseases. Now, surgical procedures are becoming less traumatic and safe. Major progress in safe anesthesia, intensive care, nutritional support, and drugs like antibiotics, antithrombotics, coagulants, as well as selective use of blood and blood components. They are all contributed to the advancement of endocrine surgery. Now, advancement of surgical instrumentation, surgical visualization, energy and coagulation devices made surgery safe day by day. Just 2 slides about the new technique. I'm not going to show you any instrument or equipment or live surgical procedures. Some of them are covered by co-speaker in parathyroid surgery. But I'm just giving a touch upon the bullet points. We have something called intraoperative neural monitoring. You know, thyroid surgery is a risk of having loss of voice. So how to monitor the recurrent nerve during surgery? So the IONM is coming up to rescue. Though it is not established for controlled trials, those people believe that it's going to help us. The safe surgery using energy-based devices. Minimal access and robot-assisted endocrine surgery. Like any other surgical field, the manual access and robots are playing big role now. And we have some tools to use from the knowledge has come from the basic sciences, BRAF and mutations for prognostication of appropriate thyroid cancer. There are several such tests based on the basic research to prognosticate endocrine tumors. There are some surgical skill required to handle this advanced cancers, invading to the thyroid cancers, invading to the aerodigestive tract. It's all possible nowadays with resection of trachea. And we've got tracheal implants now also developing from the stem cells to put there. Innovative surgical solutions for obesity and type 2 diabetes mellitus. All you know that nowadays they're also applied to diabetes mellitus. Now, the utility of the indocyanine grain, you might have heard about this new concept is coming up in the last couple of years to isolate or identify the parathyroids during thyroid surgery. It's also applied in other oncologic surgery in colorectal cancers. Intraoperative PTH assay for early prognostication of postoperative hypocalcemia and completeness for thyroidectomy. Telemedicine technology in endocrine surgery, telementoring, remote care of the patients requiring long-term follow-ups. Imaging technology in endocrine tumor management, like 4D CTs, high-resolution ultrasound, PET, colon PET, you heard from Dr. Rajiv. All these things are playing big role. Intrap ultrasound in pancreatic endocrine tumors are very, very useful. We have interventional radiology for diagnosis, localization, and therapy of endocrine tumors. We can inject them with sclerosant if we cannot operate them. We have radiofrequency ablation, laser ablation, and image-guided alcohol injections. And we have now currently technology-based solutions for machine learning and clinical AI for prognosticate disease, analyzing big data coming out of clinical material and help us in managing the patients in a customized way called precision medicine. Now we have simulation tools to develop training systems in medical colleges without going for live surgical procedures. Now to conclude about the scientific advances and technological advancement, let me tell you again, repeat, the genetic testing for targeted therapy, translational research in endocrine cancer has improved the care and outcome endocrine surgery, but much work remains. Genetic markers will continue to distinguish between benign and malignant processes in difficult to diagnose cancers, such as indeterminate thyroid nodules and malignant parathyroid and adrenal tumors. However, adequate validation of new tests is essential to ensure that surgery is not delayed in those who will benefit from it and avoid in those who will not. Further research in basic and clinical aspects of small molecule kinase inhibitors will clarify the optimal uses of these agents. Investigators and clinicians should feel encouraged by the strides made in the translational endocrine cancer care and continue to integrate these findings into practice to deliver superior outcomes. Now, coming to the technological advancement in surgical equipments and instruments and surgical vision has led to wide adoption of minimal access endocrine surgery and robotic surgery. Endoscopic and robot-assisted surgical procedures through natural orifices, so-called NOTE, might have heard about intraoral excision of thyroid tumors. Besides, keyhole approach in the abdomen and chest has revolutionized the endocrine surgical technique with cosmetic outcome. Non-operative therapy using radiofrequency may be curative in very small cancers detected early. With genetic testing, high-risk individuals can be offered minimal surgical therapy in supposedly near normal glands like hereditary tumors. With the adoption of machine learning and decision-making process, and prognostication of endocrine cancers can become a reality, offering precision medicine with customized way. Now, I end my presentation with a statement from William Halstead. Operations in themselves are only a small part of the surgical procedure. We need a system which is integrated with basic science till the precision medicine, which will surely achieve to produce not only surgeons of excellence who stimulate young doctors to study surgery and commit all of their energy and life to increasing the knowledge of surgical science. I thank you all for your kind, patient listening and also giving opportunity to share the joy of a platinum jubilee celebration of SU Medical College. Shut up.
Professor Misra, for excellent deliberation. And I think this will revise our thought process regarding endocrine surgery. Now, I will request our respected Dean and Principal for his remark. So now our dean is busy. So let us see the chat box for any question. One question is there. Dr. Arun, you should ask this question.
So we get one question from the chat box to Dr. Rajiv. So what is the difference in management in familial versus sporadic hyperparathyroidism? Dr. Rajiv, please. He wants to know what is the difference in managing familial versus sporadic.
Thank you for that question. I mean, as Prof. Mishra alluded to in his presentation as well, and in my own presentation as well, how we are in a state where we understand the pathology and the pathophysiology of these parathyroid tumors. We have a better understanding of the molecular genetics in parathyroid disease, especially in relation to MEN1, familial hyperparathyroid jaw tumor syndrome, and things like that. So the difference is currently for sporadic, there's no doubt, patient is symptomatic, then they will need surgery. For familial disease, it's a completely different. Sorry. There's someone else who can. So familial disease, it's a little bit based on the risk that the disease poses to the patients, and what is the lifetime problems that's going to be associated with that genome which is mutated in that particular patient. Now, for patient with say MEN1, the pattern of disease is going to be different to that for a patient with MEN2, or similar to a patient, different to a patient with hyperparathyroid jaw tumor syndrome. So understanding the genetics will help you decide how you're going to treat that particular patient. Now, remember, with the genetic conditions, you're not almost always going to be able to cure them, especially in MEN1, because they have a high incidence of recurrence. So, the way you deal with them is based on the risk and the underlying genomic status. Sporadic, very simple. Just take the affected parathyroid out. For MEN1, people are moving towards conservative surgery because we know we cannot cure them completely. But and the objective is also to minimize the morbidity, because they are going to have this for the rest of their life. So you need to have a very clear understanding of what is it you aim to achieve in that particular patient.
I now request our respected principal for his remark on this subject.
Esteemed speakers, participant, at the outset, I apologize without knowing that mine is unmuted. A call came from government, I had to talk. I really feel sorry for the disturbance during the talk of Professor S.K. Mishra. I realized it later. Now, I have only one submission. In fact, Professor Mishra, I think he will clarify. We tried our level best this time to start a postdoctoral course in endocrine surgery in SCB. I knew, being part of the MCI, I knew that the postdoctoral course or MCS course is not available in endocrine surgery. To my utter surprise, DNB also doesn't have a course in postdoctoral, FNB PD in endocrine surgery. Sir, we should have a concerted effort, because this specialty can only grow to the higher heights, to the higher level, only when there is a structured course. I don't know what is Dr. Parameswaram's view. What about the internal, what is the situation in the international arena regarding the postdoctoral course?
I think you can start your one-year course. It's within your academic board. I don't know what is your structure of your academic board. So starting one-year fellowship program is doesn't fall under the MCI or national board. So it's under your prerogative to take the approval from the government. But before that, you have to have sufficient number of clinical data and material to convince them that you will be able to train somebody who is coming for a particular one-year fellowship program. Well, when I started the program here, I started with one-year program. But by the time I had a number of cases being quite adequate to give them exposure. And I even started with only 2 faculty members. I didn't have even all full quota of faculty members. You can start with that. That is one thing. Second thing, the national board has a fellowship options also. So you have to apply to national board. But before that, I think you have to strengthen your department in terms of the faculty. as well as in terms of the turnover of the clinical material. Otherwise, you have all the elements in your institution. For MCH endocrine surgery, there's different guidelines. You are active, executive member of the MCI, you know very well. Now the NMC coming up, so they have the guidelines. They have made it very flexible that even without MCH also you can appoint faculty with 2 years experience after general surgery. 2 years experience endocrine surgery also they can be eligible teachers. So I request you, sir, please fill up the department with faculty. That's the first requirement for you. So without that, I think no training program can be possible.
Before I take the viewpoint of Dr. Parameswaram, I would have a little further submission. The fact is that, you know, MCH in endocrine surgery was never tried during my tenure. As you rightly said, sir, faculty, infrastructure, and clinical load is essential for this thing. No doubt about it. We have faculty. But DNB, as per the recommendation of DNP, 2 faculty, 1 faculty with 2-year experience and the second faculty with 5-year experience, they permit a DNB course. We should make a persistent effort that DNB in surgical endocrinology should be, endocrine surgery should be there, and you can take the lead, sir. You being the father of endocrine surgery in India, you should take the lead. Now, second thing, I would also impress upon one thing regarding the fellowship program. Well, as far as my knowledge goes, if there is a 2-year special training in endocrine surgery, he can be designated as a faculty, which will be MCI recognized, not 1 year. So if somebody has 2 years special training, and when we say special training, it has to be in a recognized institute like SGPGI. So these are the things you should please keep in mind before we think of starting a postdoctoral course or a MCH in endocrine surgery. Dr. Parameswaram.
Unmute, sir. Unmute.
Acha, permit him to unmute. I think you have to tell, he needs to be permitted to unmute. Devasis.
He is permitted, sir. There is
Yeah.
some technical problem here.
Devasis, why don't you help him? Devasis,
Sir. Sir.
unmute kari parnante tike help karo.
Unmute, sir.
No, I cannot. This.
Professor Rajiv, I suggest Professor Hota that please try for 1 year thyroid surgery fellowship. Because thyroid surgery is quite common, you get it there, and you have endocrine department established. They will give you a lot of thyroid surgery. So start with a 1 year program for thyroid surgery fellowship. If not 1 year, at least 3 months or 6 months, and request a different departments, colleges, etc. You have so many now colleges coming up. You can call people from endocrine or not endocrine, head and neck, general surgery. Okay, now Rajiv is connected. So
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, my screen froze for a moment. Yeah, so Prof. Misra clearly alluded to what is it that you require, in terms of fellowship programs. See, the thing is that it doesn't matter whether it's 1 year or 2 year. You need to have the right faculty, the right caseload, and the right sort of mentorship for these things. You start off with 1 year program. I mean, in our institution, we have a 1 year program and then followed by an advanced fellowship for another year. But you start off small and then you see how things goes. Now, obviously, if you don't have the requisite faculty, you can always have proctorship from other institutes. Now, SGPGI, you have a big cohort of surgeons there who are always available, and we can do it now remotely with telemedicine and stuff like that. So I don't know what the guidelines in terms of MCI are, I have no idea about that. I mean, Prof. Misra will have ideas on that, but it is possible to start smaller, and then you can always expand. But you need to have the right case mix. You need to have, the right structure to the program. All these are very important.
I think very well said, sir. At the end of it, it is not the degree that counts, it is the exposure that counts. Very well said, sir. But with these few words, really again, on behalf of the institution, we are really thankful to both the speakers for having deliberated on endocrine surgery, and we look forward to such occasion. Before I conclude, I extend a warm welcome to you, Dr. Parameswaram, and Professor S.K. Misra, who is part of us, to be part of the jubilation that we are going to have on 26th, 27th, and 28th. All will be live streamed. Definitely, I'll request our HOD endocrine surgery to please send the link to Dr. Parameswaram and Professor Misra. We expect you to be physically with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ota, for your kind words, and really appreciate the effort you and your team has put into this. I was just looking at the number of participants. It was quite a sizable participant. I was expecting a few more questions, but that's fine. I think it's because of lack of time. And obviously, it's a great pleasure to see Prof. Misra as well. We haven't seen each other for almost 3 years now, but look forward to seeing you sometime next year. And all of you guys in Cuttack as well.
Welcome always, sir.
Now I request our Associate Professor, Dr. Arun Kumar Mahanti, to have a vote of thanks.
Respected Chairperson, our Dean and Principal Sir, esteemed speakers, senior professors, colleagues, and dear students. As a customary, on behalf of my department, I am grateful to Dr. Rajiv for being with us and giving an excellent talk on hyperparathyroidism. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation in a short notice, sir. And Professor S.K. Misra, sir, you mean a lot to us. In fact, you are the mentor of this subspecialty throughout India. Our Dean has rightly pointed out, not only you are the father of endocrine surgery, also the father of telemedicine in India, if I am not mistaken. So thank you, sir. My sincere thanks to you for your note on this subspecialty, what is the future in India, so that our postgraduates will have a thought of it to pursue a career in this. My sincere thanks to our chairman, sir, the visionary man behind this academic event. In fact, his constant guidance, hard work is the result of this. I'm sure that it will never go in vain because of his hard work. And thank you, sir, for everything. We also appreciate our telemedicine supportive staff for their technical skills behind this show. Lastly, I wish to thank all the participants for their patient hearing, and especially my thanks to Dr. Kintu, who is rightly from Uganda. He's also with us and he has joined with us from the beginning. So thank you, Kintu. And another person, Dr. Sanjay from AIIMS Jabalpur, he's also with there. Your presence, your surprise presence will inspire us. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks again to all. Looking forward for such occasion in future. Thank you. Bye-bye.